Hey guys, Malcolm here at Bug Out Brothers, and today I'm going to show you 10 tips to improve your aim. Stay tuned. So first I want to talk about where I'm getting these tips from. So I've been in the Air Force for 9 years now, and in that time I've done several courses on shooting guns and maintenance and cleaning them, in the field, as well as formal classroom courses. And I've also spent a lot of personal time at the range. So some of these tips are coming from my own experience, my military training, and then some of them are coming from Jerry Miculek. If you don't know who that is, he's a competitive and speed shooter. He's been doing it for over 30 years. I think he holds over 100 national and world titles, as well as 20 different speed shooting records. You definitely should go check out his channel. I'll have a link to it down in the description. He does just some amazing things with guns.
Stand by.
So all the tips I'm giving you today, you can practice in your house right now without using any live ammo. So before we get started, I want to empty out my magazine, and I rock it back 3 times just to ensure that there's nothing in there, and I like looking down there just to make sure, and then I point it at the ground and pull the trigger. That's how I ensure that I have no live rounds in this thing whatsoever. I mean, I'm usually pretty paranoid about that kind of thing. So I highly encourage you to do the same thing if you're going to be practicing any of these techniques at your house or dry firing. So for the first tip, I want to talk about your stance. So a lot of us are probably familiar with the Weaver stance. So the Weaver stance is kind of, you're in a fighting stance and you're pushing with your gun hand and you're pulling back with your other hand. And this is supposed to help you stabilize your gun. Now, this is kind of the traditional stance that has been taught for years, but today I'm going to expose you to a different stance that is getting more and more widely accepted, and that almost all competitive shooters and speed shooters use today. So this new stance is called the isosceles stance, and what I want you to do is just stand square like this, just completely square, facing your target. So I'm going to go point by point and show how this is a superior stance to the traditional fighting stance that most people are familiar with. So first off, in the Weaver stance, let's see what is my range that I can fire and engage a target at in this stance. So I can aim forward, obviously. I can aim all the way over here, no problem, right? I don't have to readjust my feet. Now, can I do that on the other side? No, not really. I can go about this far. So I can only engage targets from about this angle all the way to about here in the traditional stance. Now let's try the Weaver stance, where I'm perfectly square to my target. My main target's here. Now I can spin all the way over here, as well all the way over here in the Weaver stance. Now when you do this, you want to be twisting in your knees, okay? Not in your hips like this, but twist in your knees and try to keep your shoulders and everything lined up as much as you can. Your whole upper torso. Try to keep that in one piece, one moving piece. So the isosceles stance offers you a much wider range to engage targets. Okay, almost 180 degrees here. Anywhere along here, I can engage a target without having to move my feet. Whereas in the traditional Weaver stance, I'm pretty limited to about here to about here. So back to the Weaver stance, they teach you to push with your gun hand and pull with your other hand, and this is supposed to help you kind of balance your hand like this. And the problem with that is if you're pushing and you're applying so many pounds of force this way and so many pounds of force this way, it's hard to reproduce that exact poundage of force next time you go and shoot. And if you can't reproduce it, it's not effective. All right, so this pushing and pulling method to help level your sights and your gun, it's not reproducible. So in the isosceles stance, again, you bring it up to your dominant eye, and there is no crazy pushing or pulling. What I like to do is I lock my arms and then I relax them just slightly. So they're not quite locked, but they're pretty close to it. So the next thing I want to talk about is bringing your guns to your dominant eye and not bringing your dominant eye to your gun. So traditionally, you see people, they kind of go like this. They close one eye and they bring their head down and kind of rest it on their shoulder here, and they bring their eye to their gun. And that's very ineffective. It throws off your balance. What you want to be doing standing square and bring the gun up to your eye, right, into your dominant eye, so slightly off to the left or the right. And even if you insist on sticking with the Weaver stance, you can still do this, right? Bring the gun up to your dominant eye instead of bringing your head down to your gun. So the benefit of this is when you're engaging multiple targets. So let's say, right, you want to engage your target there, and then there, then there, then there. What tends to happen is when your head is tilted like that, your gun tends to slope downwards. It kind of arcs down, and it forces you to bring it down and then up, bring it down and then up, bring it down and then up, and you have to realign your sights every time. But let's say if you're in the isosceles stance, you have your gun up to your dominant eye and you're twisting with your knees, right? Your head is perfectly square, so you're not throwing yourself off balance, and you can engage targets cleanly and effectively by doing this. So the next tip is keep both eyes open. Now, if you're used to the traditional Weaver stance of going like this, it might take some getting used to at first, but it is far more effective if you can train with both eyes open. So let's say I bring the gun up to my eyes, right? If I close one eye, I can't see anything past my hand right here. If there's a target over here, I can't see it at all, and I'm completely unaware of it. So that's one benefit of having both eyes open. And also depth perception, right? You need two eyes to have depth perception, and if you're engaging a target that's pretty far away, it's going to be a lot easier to be able to see it with both eyes. Also, you're just used to engaging in the world with two eyes. You don't walk around all day with one eye closed. No, you're used to having two eyes open. So shoot how you're comfortable with, right? Shoot how you're used to interacting with the environment. So next, let's talk about the grip. So if you go back and you watch old movies, you can see the evolution of hand grips, right? Back in the day, they used to teach the cup and saucer method, right? So you hold the gun like this, and this bottom hand kind of helps stabilize it a little bit, but it doesn't really do anything to help with the recoil control. You'll see a lot of old movies where they're holding one wrist like this, again, to stabilize their aim, but it's only going to be effective for one shot, and then after that, they have to realign their aim because of the recoil. The most effective way is to get as much of both your hands on this gun as possible, okay? So usually they teach to hold the gun like this, cup this hand on it, and try to get as much of your second hand on this gun as possible to help with the recoil control and help stabilize the gun. And hold the gun up as high as you can. Don't be holding the gun down here like this, all right? That's just going to make it recoil more. You know, in an ideal situation, you would be holding the gun like this, all honesty, and that would allow the barrel to go straight back, right? The barrel wouldn't go up at all, it would just go straight back like this. So you want to try to hold this gun as high as you possibly can and put as much of both your hands on this gun as you possibly can. So honestly, your thumbs don't really help out that much, right? You really just want to keep your thumbs out of the way. So people usually just point their thumbs forward and try to get them to grip as much of the gun as you can. You know, nowadays you even see accessories where they have like a little lever right here to get your thumb on there so you can keep pushing forward with your thumb. But just keep your thumbs out of the way of the slide here and just kind of point them forward. So next up, I want you guys to focus on locking your wrists, okay? So let's say I have very loose wrists, right? Loosey-goosey. And I fire, it's going to kick back a lot. So I don't want you guys to flex all your muscles, be super rigid, but keep those wrists locked, because that is going to absorb most of the recoil right there. If you can keep your wrists locked, it's going to minimize the recoil, minimize your sight from popping when you're firing multiple shots. So lock those wrists in place. So next up, let's talk about your sights. So when you're looking down the sights, you want the top of the front of the sight to be at the same level as the top of the rear of your sights, and you want the gap on both sides of the front sight to be even with both sides right here, okay? Now, this might be a little confusing at first, but you want to focus that it has an even gap between both sides. And most people will tell you that you want to focus on the center dot, right? So if you're pointing down the barrel, you can focus on the rear sight, you can focus on the front sight, or you can focus on the target. Now, having the front sight aligned with the rear sight is so important that most people prefer to focus on the front sight just to make sure that it's aligned perfectly with the rear two sights from left to right, and the gap between the left and the right is the same, and that the top is level with the rear sight. So next up is actually pulling the trigger. So a mistake that a lot of people make is that when they pull the trigger, they have this joint right here actually on the trigger. They shove their finger in there as far as it will go, and they pull back like this, right? And now what's happening here is when you're using this joint, you don't have an even, you're not making even contact with the trigger, and you're actually pulling back kind of at an angle by going like that. What you want to do is get the meaty part of your finger on the trigger and try to pull straight back towards you. So don't pull with the joint of your first knuckle, but instead pull with the meaty part of your finger and try to come straight back. So next up, I want you guys to use the minimum amount of force needed to pull your trigger. So if you have a 2-pound trigger, apply 2 pounds or 2.5 pounds of force to that trigger to pull it back. If you have a 2-pound trigger, don't apply 7 pounds of force, right? That is just going to mess up your sights when you're putting all that pressure right there. You want just the bare minimum amount to actually pull that trigger, and you want to get familiar with what that is so you can keep applying that same amount of pressure every time that you fire your weapon. So the next tip I want to give you is a bit of a controversial one, but I want you guys to dry fire your weapons. Now, a lot of people would get up in arms about this and be like, oh no, that's terrible for your gun. You're going to break your gun by doing that. It's going to wear out quicker. But I've done some research on this, and most guns are fine, right? You have to look up your specific gun and see what other people say about it. Some guns, they do wear out quicker by dry firing them. If you do have one of these guns that is prone to breaking more easily by dry firing, you can go out and buy a round, kind of a dummy round, that allows you to dry fire your weapon, and I encourage you to go do that. The great thing about dry firing is that you can be at home and you can practice your stance, you can practice your trigger control, you can practice your sight alignments, and you're saving money by not wasting ammo. And believe it or not, it actually is very effective. A technique that a lot of trainers will do is that they will stick a blank round in a magazine and then give somebody magazine, so they're firing, and then they get to the blank round, and what happens is that they pull the trigger and the barrel still jumps. And you're asking, well, why is the barrel jumping if it was a blank round? It's people anticipating the bang, right? It's very natural. Everybody does it. I do it. You go to fire and you anticipate the gunshot, and you just twitch just a little bit in anticipation. By dry firing over and over again, you can train yourself to not anticipate the shot, right? And then when you're actually at the range, you do exactly what you've always trained to do, and you'll be a much better shot, and you won't be flinching when you shoot. So I highly encourage that you guys practice by dry firing. In the military, they train us to dry fire, so they're obviously not afraid of wearing out their equipment. I practice my draw sometimes. I practice my stance. You can practice your hand grip, your sight alignment, your draw. You can practice everything just while you're sitting there on the couch watching TV. Just for God's sakes, make sure your gun is empty. Remember, I like to rack it back 3 times with no ammo in it. I shoot at the ground just to make sure. If after all this you're still firing slightly to the left or the right or up or down, it might not be you. Your sights might be off, and you might need to adjust your sights. You'll know you'll need to adjust your sights if all your bullets are in a nice clean cluster, regardless of where they are. If they're in a clean cluster, then that's kind of an indication that your sights might need to be adjusted. So if your bullets are going to the left or the right of your target, you need to adjust the windage, and that is this rear sight here. If your bullets are either high or low, then you need to adjust the elevation of your front sight. Now, I'm not going to go into specifics on how to do that because different guns have different types of sights, and you can't really cover all of them. You'd have to look up your sight specifically to see how to adjust them. So there you have it, guys. That's my 10 tips to improve your aim. I know getting used to the isosceles stance might be a little uncomfortable and odd at first, but give it a try, guys. Keep practicing with it, and I'm telling you, you'll see major improvements with the isosceles stance compared to the Weaver stance.